my time in the Army comes to a close, and like many of our peer group are in this moment of deep reflection over our service and over the last 25 years, most of which was in combat, and how to kind of make sense of that, right? Like how to make sense of the things we learned through success, the things we learned through shortcoming and failure. And I think part of the part of the reconciliation process is figuring out what lessons we learned, leadership, organizational leadership, combat leadership, and otherwise, that are that we're responsible for, that we're responsible to to pass to the next generation. And what I'll share is at least for me and a couple of my close peers, is we have a deep, what I would just describe as a deep sense of urgency. Those aren't my words, those are Mark Fedorovich's words, a deep feeling of urgency to pass all of the things that we learned, good and bad, through success and failure, to the next generation, sort of so that it can mean something, so that it can make, it can make sense, and maybe out of a moral imperative that no one should, we shouldn't make the same mistakes twice in two generations.
Today's episode is brought to you by Dunedain Systems. Dunedain is excited to introduce WarMind, an AI platform purpose-built for the military. WarMind supports operational product generation, massively accelerating planning, operations, knowledge management, and intel workflows. What makes WarMind different is it actually connects to your unit's data and learns how your specific warfighting function operates. It's not some generic chatbot. It's a full agentic system built by warfighters for warfighters. WarMind understands, learns, and helps you iterate on your SOPs, your planning processes, your MTO, your operational doctrine, and more. Units across SOCOM, the broader DoD, are already using it, already cutting workflows that used to take days down to minutes. Now, the beta is free for a limited time for .mil and .edu users. So head over to dunedinsystems.com. That's DUNEDAIN systems.com and just hit try for free. Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonppc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's ADYTONPBC.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and today we're diving into the Green Notebook of Mike Kloepper, a career Army officer, former commander of the 173rd Airborne Brigade, and the current Brigade Tactical Officer at the United States Military Academy. Mike has spent more than 2 decades leading soldiers in some of the most demanding environments imaginable. And as his time in uniform comes to a close, he's been thinking deeply about what it means to pass the torch on to the next generation. In this conversation, Mike and I talk about the moral imperative leaders have to share what they've learned before those lessons disappear. We discuss why organizations often capture lessons, but fail to change behavior, and why oral histories, writing, and conversations like this one matter so much. We also get into one of the most important leadership challenges facing the force today: the mental, physical, and spiritual readiness of our soldiers. Mike shares how he came to believe that readiness is not just about PT and shooting, but it's about helping people become more resilient, more connected, and more grounded in who they are and why they serve. He talks about programs he helped build in command that got soldiers outside, brought platoons together, created space for reflection, and reduced high risk behavior across the formation. We also talk about social media, accessibility, and why leaders need to get out of the office if they want to understand what is really happening inside the organizations. And toward the end, Mike offers advice for lieutenants, captains, and commanders about presence, toughness, teamwork, and what it means to be there when things are hard. This is a conversation about combat lessons, organizational trust, soldier care, and the kind of leadership that cannot be done from behind a desk. So grab your green notebooks and please welcome to the show, Colonel Mike Kloepper.
Great. Yeah, super appreciate it and appreciate the chance to be here.
Well, one of the things that you and I were previously discussing, I think is really important, is this idea of kind of like emptying out your rucksack before you move on from the Army. And so I would love for you to share your thoughts on passing the torch with our listeners.
Yeah. It's part of the reason I'm really appreciative for the chance to be with you and on this podcast. It's one of the reasons that I think veterans-based podcasts are important. And I guess what I would offer is, like, as my time in the Army comes to a close, and like many of our peer group are in this moment of deep reflection over our service and over the last 25 years, most of which was in combat, and how to kind of make sense of that, right? Like, how to make sense of the things we learned through success, the things we learned through shortcoming and failure. And I think part of the part of the reconciliation process is figuring out what lessons we learned, leadership, organizational leadership, combat leadership, and otherwise, that we're responsible for, that we're responsible to to pass to the next generation. And what I'll share is, at least for me and a couple of my close peers, is we have a deep, what I would just describe as a deep sense of urgency. Those aren't my words; those are Mark Fedorovich's words. A deep feeling of urgency to pass all of the things that we learned, good and bad, through success and failure, to the next generation, sort of so that it can mean something, so that it can make, it can make sense, and maybe out of a moral imperative that no one should, we shouldn't make the same mistakes twice in two generations.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that's almost like counterintuitive a lot of times to what we actually do. Like, it's funny. I can't remember how many times, I've been to a combat training center. But I mean, like, if for those that are stationed there, they tell you they pretty much use the same slide deck over and over and
Right.
over again. So yeah, like I think it's one thing that we say we're good at doing after action reviews and capturing the lessons learned, and we have a center for Army lessons learned. But I think in reality, in practice, we don't necessarily, as an institution, do a great job of it. We capture a lot of stuff, but like a lot of stuff's like getting through the fishnet, but before it gets passed on. But I think with the turnover and everything else, I agree with you. I think it is a moral imperative, or there is a sense of urgency to make sure these lessons are codified somewhere, even if it's just one or two people
Right.
that you've been able
Right.
to pass those lessons on to, 'cause then they'll continue to do the same.
Right. Yeah. To your point, I can remember in ILE, there's I mean, this is like the way jumping into the Wayback Machine, but I can remember this class in ILE in which they talked about the nature of learning organizations, and the components were something like you had to have informal cultural structures to learn. You had to have formal learning pathways. You had to have mechanisms to solicit information and mechanisms to store information and mechanisms to share information. And then you also have to change behavior. And I can remember like ever since I learned that model, I can remember feeling like really awkward because we've got all of those things, but we don't necessarily always change behavior the way we know we need to or should.
So, what are ways that folks, especially those with combat experience, uh, do you feel like they should pass these lessons on, or they can pass these lessons on?
Ways in terms of like platforms, modalities, or
Yeah, modalities.
I think so yeah, I had this thought that the veterans based podcast is uniquely valuable. And as I think about the units I was in, I'm not sure that we did a great job of capturing everything we did in combat. Like I'm not completely sure that all of our patrol reports, all of our lessons learned, all of the ways that we were trying to integrate things, all like things we did for targeting. I'm not sure that we captured all of those things with the diligence we should have. A lot of things were captured digitally that I don't really know what happened to them. Like once we unplugged the servers and walked away from our year-long deployment, I think like a lot of that might have evaporated. I think. I know we certainly like met our requirement to, submit the unit history to our higher headquarters, but I don't know where those unit histories went. And it almost feels like we may have moved in reverse where all of a sudden these oral histories take on a heightened level of importance. And these oral histories at some point might be one of the principal ways that we solicit first person feedback from the war. We don't really like have diaries that we're going through. Like we don't really have an archival room at West Point for the GWAT of like war diaries. And all of a sudden all we're gonna have is platforms like this.
Yeah, yeah, or I don't know, like TikTok videos or something.
Right.
What
Hopefully for the better.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, a couple of years ago when the Harding Project launched,
Yeah,
the chief was really big on discourse, and I think, his big thing was like, hey, like producing change and, bringing up issues and talking about, you know, one of the things he was talking about at least was like talking about things that areas we can improve on across the force. But the lessons learned piece, I think is huge with that, with the writing. And there's so many outlets out there right now, where folks can pass those lessons on. And I think just the act of sitting down and writing things out is a great reflective tool, for yourself. So for I think folks listening who have
for sure.
experience, Iraq or Afghanistan, and think they have something that would be valuable to a younger generation. I think just sitting down with the goal of publishing something, even if you don't necessarily get it published, but to go through that process of capturing those lessons learned before they're gone.
And to that point, I think there's no shortage of like veteran blogs that are pretty good. There's a whole like I'm learning about there's a whole emerging industry, and the ability to self-publish work is more that's more accessible than others ever. And I think we're seeing the resurgence and revitalization of our own professional publications in a digital format that, in a way that's accessible on your phone or device or whatever. So I think all of those things are encouraging. I'd also add though, like not everything we learned is necessarily applicable to the future, right? Like we've got to be careful to bring forward universal lessons and not necessarily anchor ourselves to the past, right? We want to bring forward universal lessons that we can platform to iterate off of,
That's great.
innovate.
Yeah, great point. Well, speaking of some of those universal lessons, I think there were things that I watched you do from afar. I guess like one country over, actually, in Germany, when you were a brigade commander. But I know some of that stuff went back to battalion command, and I think like some of the things that you did and some of the focus areas you had um, does translate, regardless of whether you're in the GWAT era or in the current era. There's things that you can do to help with really the health of your organization. So I'd like to talk about some of that right
Yeah,
now. And I think we'll go with like your focus on mental health. And just to preface that, I recently did an interview with Guy Winch, and he brought up something I thought was really interesting. He was saying that leaders typically, and this guy is talking about in the corporate world, but leaders talk about all these health resources that organizations have. So leaders will talk about, we have all this access to this healthcare for mental health and these lines you can call and all this stuff, telling all the different resources that are out there, but they're not actually doing anything internally themselves as the leaders to improve the mental health of their organizations. And so I thought that was a really great point he brought up on the podcast, was that, if you're in charge of a group of people, you do have a responsibility to kind of make sure that the pulse of that organization is healthy. And there are things that you can do to lower stress, lower anxiety, make sure that people understand why they're showing up every single day. And I thought that was a great point. So that was a really long about way to preface what I want to hear you say about some of your lessons learned.
no, I appreciate that. So, and I appreciate the chance to formulate a coherent response while you set the stage. To be completely honest with you, um, so early in battalion command, I had not really thought about it before battalion command, but early in battalion command, I be I be I began to understand and became a believer that, I mean, that our mental health crisis that people talk about, I know that that's like inflammatory language, but I believe that that's real, at least to an extent. And we could see, I don't know, I don't exactly know what the right word is. I wouldn't want somebody to like thin slice my language. I don't know if there's a degree of fragility, or um, if we're seeing like a degradation of daily coping skills. I don't know if it's because the contemporary environment has new and unique stressors, like, family dynamics are different. We've got ubiquitous connectivity. Everybody's got a cell phone. There, social media and allowance of comparison others and being able to see how other people live. I don't know necessarily what the variables are, but we could see the manifestation of our resiliency issues, is how I would maybe like put a doctrinal tagline on it. We could see it manifest itself in our readiness. I could see it in two battalion commands, and in brigade command. And sometimes it'd be the number of deployable soldiers. Sometimes it would be the number of soldiers that could, like complete what I would consider to be just like standard normal Army infantry training, road march, live fire, kind of like, hey, it's going to be a tough day in the woods kind of thing. Uh, some some days it would be, just what I would describe as how we respond to life's normal stressors, like things that are within the barber poles of what humans deal with. And I became acutely I became acutely aware of how those things that our resiliency issue would manifest themselves into unit readiness. And to your point, I started to get uh I would say like an allergic reaction to the word resources. Like, I don't really like that word. And I'm probably like right at the point in my career where I can say like, hey, I don't like the word resources. And I'm a little bit cautious of the cottage industry that has developed to help commanders. Um, because to your point, I think the number one resource to help soldiers develop and become the best version of themselves is the chain of command. I think the principal squad leader for a soldier who needs a good counsel, or the principal counselor for a soldier in trouble, is their squad leader and platoon sergeant. Between those two guys or gals, they've got a tremendous amount of life experience. And then maybe you could echelon to the unit chaplain and the company commander. And certainly those additional external expert pillars are necessary and good and complementary, but I don't necessarily think they should be our go-to in front of the chain of command. I'll pause there, but I'm also happy to discuss some of the things that we did to get after it.
Yeah, I think I appreciate you saying that, and I think that some of the things I was thinking about is for me, like growing up, like I remember this very specifically. I got in trouble in high school, and part of my penance was doing community service for the thing I got in trouble for,
That
and
must have been good.
we won't talk about it on the show,
Yeah.
but it was I had to volunteer at the Relay for Life. And
Yep.
for those who aren't familiar with it, people walk around a track, usually a high school track, throughout the night. People take turns and all this stuff. But I did this event, and there was like bands playing throughout the night. There was food. Like I was in charge of like emptying the food out at the end of the day, like scraping out all the like KP pretty much for this event. But I saw like all these people coming together in community doing this thing. And so like getting in trouble exposed me to something completely different. And
Sure.
then I like, all of a sudden, like I discovered this whole thing and went off to college and got like the Relay for Life going on my campus. But I think what I that whole thing taught me was like until I was exposed to something, I would have never thought I would have enjoyed it. I never thought that I would have, that'd be something that I want to do. And so that was one of the things that, and people get really focused on war fighting and all that stuff. But like if you don't have a total soldier, if you don't have somebody that's happy, you're going to have those deployability issues. Like it,
That's right.
and think about how much time we spend in UCMJ and like having to run stuff down when somebody messes up at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. And so I did try throughout my company command and moving forward to create programs that introduce soldiers to community service, to volunteering outside the gates, to meeting people, to doing 5Ks, to doing races. And that was one of the things that I thought was really cool when you came along in command, is that you were doing the exact same thing, just like I said, at a much bigger level. You like almost the gamification of it.
Yeah. So we became aware, and honestly, it was our unit ministry team that turned me on to this idea. And to be clear, we had plenty of false starts, and attempted, a lot of things that just got no traction and didn't work at all. But our unit ministry team, I just sat in a couple of like spiritual readiness classes maybe that they were given young troopers, and we latched onto the idea that there's an intersection of mental, physical, and spiritual readiness. And that intersection exists outside with people that we care about doing physical activities. And that if you can get people outside in a way that's enjoyable and purposeful with a team that they care about, doing a physical activity, a shared event that is strenuous but achievable, that you can merge physical, mental, and spiritual readiness, that you can change people's behavior, you can change the way they feel about themselves, about the way they feel about their team and the unit and the mission. So we built two programs, and I'm happy to deep dive either one. We built one program where we quite literally incentivized soldiers to like get outside. And it was, I don't want to say like a little bit silly, like the kids say, like touch grass. We basically incentivized go outside and touch grass. And so we built this points mechanism that if you went, for a hike with your squad, or you went to the gym with your squad, or you did some combination of what I just described. You you could accrue points, and that those points could aggregate into time off, which I know is a little bit absurd to award soldiers with a 3 or 4 day weekend for going on a hike during the duty day, but it's what we did. And the at least atmospherically, the results from that were remarkable. And the way I would measure those results were reduction of serious incident reports, retention rates, reduction in high risk behaviors, reduction in illicit drug use, reduction in alcohol related incidents, reduction in sexual assault and harassment type incidents. I mean, we went we went in one quarter, we had 9 sexual assaults. 2 quarters later, we had one, still one too many, but a vast reduction. And then we stayed at 1 or 0 per quarter from then on out. And I can't obviously attribute that to a single initiative, but certainly part of a combination of things we tried. So we did that. Um, I'll pause there unless you want me to talk about the second one.
Yeah, go ahead and talk about the second one, and then we'll rope some questions together.
Okay. Yeah. So the second one we iterated our way towards, we called it Tough and Spirit. It was essentially a chaplain's program, but what we would do is we would take organic platoons, and we would during the work week, during the duty week, we would send them to conduct some type of challenging outdoor activity. It would include an overnight stay. It would include a nice meal. It would include concentrated time with the chaplain in which he would lead a series of reflective exercises, basically to help the soldiers. And it's a little bit weird to say, but basically to help some of these young people explore their values and how their values aligned to our Army institutional values, to explore their purpose and to see how their purpose aligned or should be aligned with winning our nation's wars. And it looked like the critical ingredients of the program were doing it by platoon, similar to like the Outdoor Warrior Quest or Outdoor Adventure Quest program that used to exist. So doing it by platoon with leadership, outside, challenging, meal, chaplain, and though that combination of variables, we had very good success. We were able to measure by the participants, by the paratroopers who participated in it. We were able to measure what we called an individual risk reduction rate by 83%. So just by virtue of being a paratrooper in Italy, there's a there's a statistical chance that you're going to commit some sort of serious incident on any given day. Like there's a rate, there's an SIR rate that we all have. And so for any individual paratrooper, that rate was a little less than 0.85%. So pretty small, but we were able to reduce that down to virtually zero, a further 83% reduction for the troopers who had participated. And I think that program, difficult to scale, but that more than any other, I think improved our unit readiness and individual readiness and all of those kinds of things.
Well, for listeners who are not familiar at all with, or just have like tangential knowledge of the military or, very surface level, like just to go back to when you were 18 years old and, you either went off into the world or went to college for the very first time and the dumb things you did. Well, now you're an 18-year-old soldier. A lot of these folks have never been out of their city, out of their county before, don't even have a driver's license. And then all of a sudden they're in Germany, they're in Italy, they're, these places all over the world where they can do whatever and mom and dad are no longer around. And
That's right.
yeah, so now you do something stupid and instead of, getting grabbed or, grabbed up by the campus police, you've now created an international incident in a
That's
foreign
right.
country. And so I do think that there is an imperative for leaders to do a little bit more to invest in their people instead of just making additional rules, different, saying no to all these things when, like you said, it's that additional investment, I think, is what made the difference for your people.
For sure. And to your point, I think the word invest is appropriate. So what I just described wasn't cheap. It was over time, it was about 283 dollars per person per event. That's not cheap when you're leading a 4,000 person organization. But we were able to tie it to Army doctrine. So Army Regulations 7-22, comprehensive physical fitness. It's got a chapter in there, chapter 10, spiritual readiness. And because the Army had provided a doctrinal backdrop, a structural underpinning, we were able to expend resources on it. We were able to use our time, and training money to train soldiers in spiritual and mental readiness. And all of a sudden the true opportunity cost were the things that we were willing to take off the calendar. So in very pragmatic terms, we shot our guns just a little bit less in order for the soldiers to spend a little bit more time together, working through character type issues.
What would you say to leaders who are listening to this right now? They're like, oh, all soldiers need to do is be able to be physically fit and shoot, like, and train, train them to whatever their MOS is. That's it. That's all we need to do. That's all we need to invest in. All this other stuff is soft, it's squishy. It doesn't make a difference. Like, what would you say to those leaders?
Um, well, like I've been in the Army a long time. So like, yes, I agree with that. Like all we need to be able to do is do PT and shoot. However, you're going to spend the time someplace. You're either going to spend the time on your troopers, arbitrating and talking about discipline issues or separations or Article 15s or assaults. You're going to spend the time on folks who make mistakes. So you can spend it on the back end after they've made the mistake, or you can spend it on the front end trying to help them be the best versions of themselves that they can be. And if you can elevate them, you elevate the collective readiness of the unit. And people fight when they believe. People fight for what they believe in. So I agree completely. We've got to be able to do PT and shoot our guns. But but those are the technical skills that have got to be put on a foundation of what you believe about yourself and your team and what you believe about your unit and nation. And I think it's commander business, it's leader business to help people find those things. I think that's leadership.
I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high yield checking and savings accounts, zero account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military ready direct deposit form is even auto populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. And there's something, again, it's an upfront investment that you're making. I think, and for leaders, there's such a great feeling. I remember in when I was in company command, we came back from Iraq, and I had this theory that like everybody was a captive audience, for 12 months that we were over there, and now they got a ton of money. And so, and they're back, they've been caged up. Now they're just ready to like let loose. And one of the things that we did was a similar program. We rewarded time off for community service, for doing like Spartan races, just getting out and doing 5Ks, whatever on the weekends, or reading or doing some sort of advancement of personal education. But the coolest thing was, so like that was the intent. And I remember a squad leader, or actually a platoon sergeant, went out, found a Homes for Heroes project. And I think almost the entire troop, and this was the cool part, like I was along for the ride. Like I wasn't the person, mandating this, but the entire troop spent the entire weekend building a house for somebody who had got a home through that program, a veteran who didn't have legs. And so at the like end of it or whatever, they got to be there for the presentation. And like that was so rewarding for me as a commander when all I did was build the structure for it. But the NCOs in that troop like just went and ran with the program. So I think there's definitely a little bit of a reward aspect too as an individual once you put in that upfront time to build that framework.
For sure. For sure. As you say that, I'm thinking about the group dynamics that would occur and the individual dynamics that would occur during a deployment. It's on like on a primal level, people would feel you would gain a deep fraternal love for the men and women that you were deployed with, a deep, deep fraternal connection. And in some cases, like we'd become addicted like to adrenaline or cortisol, you know, um and I think when we'd come back and all of those things would change and poof, all of a sudden you're separated from the guys or and gals that you just spent 12 to 18 months with, and you don't have a daily life and death stimulus, which I know sounds, I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but I also know that everybody who knows. It's like if you know, you know, sort of thing. Um, yeah, any initiatives like you just described where you could replace those components, those variables, those feelings with something positive, I think paid off, and I think are worthy of remembering as we look to the future.
Yeah, the basic things I did, I don't I probably have to sit down and, really reflect to remember those, but it was like events like that that, are still very vivid in
Right.
my mind as a leader. Well, something else I'm curious about too is, and I struggled with this, was social media presence. And I know policies continue to change, and but you were constantly out there highlighting the things that your soldiers were doing, and I know that they were sending you pictures, and I imagine your DMs were full all the time when stuff was going down. One, do you think you benefited as a commander having that presence? And two, could you just share, I guess, some of the things that you
Yeah,
observed through that?
yeah. So it's a little bit weird to talk about, like I'm 51 years old. Like I don't know anything about social media, but I've learned and I'm learning. So I was in the war college heading into brigade command during COVID. And like everybody who's going into a new job, you start to study the organization that you're going to. So I started following the social media pages associated with the brigade I was going to. And what it looked like the soldiers had were at war or had developed these deep mistrust issues with the chain of command within the context of COVID. It's completely, very, very understandable in 2020 why a young soldier would be skeptical of his commander. That was playing out in in the social media sphere. So when I arrived to the command, all that existed in that domain was present in real life. There were these deep trust issues. So it was a little bit in the previous team of commanders had and sergeant majors had attempted to mitigate it through what I would describe as like standard army processes, trying to like root out folks, trying to like root out who the anonymous posters were that are, you know, throwing jabs at the chain of command and whatnot. And like you can't you can't argue you can't argue with an anonymous 19-year-old who's in the barracks. Like there's no way to win that argument. Like there's no, like you're not going to win that. So we took a different approach, and we built we built the command teams built a series of social media pages on Instagram. That's where it looked like, the kids were hanging out, and essentially started we started to just really highlight um highlight positive soldier interactions and positive things the soldiers were doing. We will also use them to communicate directly to the soldiers. They, like write like a little note and post it on Instagram. And at least for that generation at that moment, it was a good way to reinforce the command vision and priorities and messages and all of those things. The tipping point, the tipping point came after about 6 months. One of these like anonymous meme pages sent me a note. I'd never gotten a note before on Instagram. They sent me a note on Instagram like, "Hey, sir, the food in the mess hall stinks. Here's a picture. We want you to fix it. Tomorrow we're gonna send this picture to Army WTF moments." And I looked at the picture, I was like, man, they're right. That stinks. So like we walked down to the mess hall and like looked, and sure enough, lunch was terrible. And so what they were sharing was a legitimate complaint. And what we found was a lot of the toxicity was just young people who didn't have agency or voice. So I wrote back to him and said, "Hey, we're going to fix it." And sure enough, within 2 days, we had solved a couple of the problems in the mess hall and had made like gotten a couple of quick wins. We had really great 92 golf cooks, a couple of quick wins through short-term resourcing, and that changed it. And all of a sudden, the social media became a conduit for our troopers without voice to communicate more clearly and regularly with their command. And there were certainly, I don't want to say naysayers, but there's certainly skeptics, like it would be super frustrating to the first sergeants or maybe like super frustrating to the platoon sergeants to have a soldier anonymously reach out to a commander and say, "Hey, sir, ma'am, please fix this." But from our lens, we the leaders are all on the same team. And thank goodness that they feel comfortable and trust any of us rather than exiting the organization to solve a problem that is within our problem to solve. We just don't know about it. And so once that happened, and once the platform became a two basically a two-way conversation um, between the leadership and the folks that just wanted a little bit of voice, it became a very positive platform to reinforce, all of the command climate kind of things. I would highlight, I've gotten a couple of lieutenants have asked me, young leaders, mostly lieutenants have asked me like, "Hey, sir, how do you lead on social media?" You don't. That's not true. That's not real. Leadership is an in-person, eyeball to eyeball, intrusive kind of business. Social media is a reasonable platform to 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 reinforce command themes and messages, but leadership is person to person.
It's something that you said I want to go back to, and it's I, I think I'm curious because the example you gave, somebody's pointing out something wrong with your organization. Do you feel like there's like this pool as a commander or a leader to live in the land of make believe and think that everything in your unit is perfect, or like the culture is the best culture in the army, whatever, and that it takes like a deliberate step or two to get outside of that to get the ground truth on stuff?
Okay. Well, I think you just asked two different questions, so I'll answer them independently. I don't know if most commanders feel a pull to live in the land of make believe. So I would disagree with that premise. I would observe that most organizations always put the best foot forward to the commander. And you sort of know that. You sort of know that like every slide you see is maybe like a little bit more green than it should be. You sort of know that like every everything you see has got like a little bit more spit and polish on it than it normally would. Like if so you know to look at the world through the lens of they curated this for me at this moment. And if you recognize that, you can calibrate a little bit. However, to your second point, 100% in order to calibrate, you've got to leave the office and like go down to the motor pool or go down to the gym and check things out. One of my favorite things to do would be to go from our brigade maintenance meeting, and I would like pick a bumper number, and like I'd So like, okay, so that cannon or that truck is missing that widget. And if you're telling me that widget is going to be here in like 14 days or whatever the thing is. Okay. And then after lunch, I'd like walk down to the motor pool and like find that truck. And sometimes it would be exactly as described. Sometimes it would be better. Sometimes, there's like some young specialist down there. There's like, no, sir, we fixed this 2 weeks ago. We can't. And sometimes, there'd be like this shell of a vehicle sitting there with no tires, like so. And I think you've got to get out to calibrate your understanding a little bit
And you're talking about physically getting out of the office, but I think like when you're on
physically.
social media, I mean, like I would imagine a lot of stuff was coming into your DMs of
Yeah.
like an even greater amount than that. So I mean, like it. I guess would you encourage leaders to do that now, to kind of like follow in your footsteps to create another avenue to be able to get that ground truth understanding on the organization?
Well, I think the principles would be you want to be genuinely accessible to your formation in whatever way that is appropriate to your thing. And I would be like really, really cautious to say like, hey, I had an Instagram page in Brigade Command, so that's the right way to do it. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It was a good tool at that moment, but I thought long and hard about the risks associated with it and the policy implications. And is it my page? Is it the Army's page? It's my personal page, by the way. Um, you know, but I think the underlying principle is you want to be accessible to your formation, and you want to inspire a climate in which your subordinate leaders are accessible to the totality of the formation, and recognize that if a soldier bypasses his first line supervisor and goes to the commander, that is definitely frustrating to the first line supervisor. We all agree. So like first sergeant would come and be like, "Hey, sir, I don't want my soldiers coming to you." I agree. So make yourself more accessible. Make yourself the leader that they will come to. Like, but in the meantime, I'm not going to throw up a barrier.
Yeah, I did not have. We had like a private Instagram page that I posted on, but it wasn't me. It was just like the program we were running. But
Yeah.
the one thing I did do that I thought was very helpful is like I would go around, and if a soldier was like telling me about something, like they were saying, "Hey, like this is coming up or whatever, I'm going to go do this thing." I'd be like, shoot me a picture of it.
Oh
Not
yeah.
not to post on social media, but I was like, "Hey, just shoot me a picture of it," and I would give him my phone number,
Yep.
and that would freak people out. But I would get
Yep.
text on the weekends of like soldiers doing cool stuff, and sending me pictures or like sending me selfies or whatever. But what was great is like I remember we had our squadron ball, and we had a bus plan, but it wasn't getting down to the soldiers. So I get a text on the day of the ball, be like, "Hey, sir, like we're all sitting in the barracks. We have no idea what the plan is to get everybody there." And so I was able to reach out to the commanders and just say, "Hey, I'm getting wind of this," and that was always like that was my code to them that like somebody's told me that
Right.
this is going wrong. But giving my number out turned out to be, I almost saw it as like a pressure valve for the organization, because if they don't feel like for whatever reason, you can always go back and address the issues after the fact, but for whatever reason, stuff is not coming up the chain of command or something stuck somewhere, or a leader's doing the best job they can to try to handle it, but it's not moving. By making yourself accessible, you can do something that nobody else can do as a commander. So again, I think back to your point of making yourself accessible, whatever form that is just again a great way, one, to show people you care, but two, you can unstuck stuck things in an organization a lot faster than people lower than you on the chain of command can.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I would highlight obviously like I think you've got to be for folks like that are thinking through this on the front end of battalion command or company command. You've obviously got to be like a little bit cautious not to be reactionary. Like I certainly had a brigade commander he would go do PT with a company we all like lived in fear because somebody was getting called to his office. Like there was no chance it was going to go well, and somebody was going to get called up to his office to like, get yelled at about socks or whatever. So I think you've got to be a little bit careful to not be, um, not to be overly reactionary. And I think you've also got to be a little bit careful that sometimes, soldiers will have complaints, and sometimes they are legitimate, like, hey, we need to fix that. But sometimes that's just the way the Army is, and we're going to work today. And like, I appreciate that you don't like it, but here's why. I'm going to give you clarity and context, and we have to work until the job is done. Both are
That's
true.
yeah, it's a great point. And now that you're not too far out of brigade command, like I think the your memories are still fresh. We have a lot of junior officers and company grade officers that listen to this
Sure.
podcast. So, do you have advice to say a lieutenant coming out of the basic officer leader course um, before coming to their unit, like what they should expect, or what would you expect of them as a former brigade commander?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's probably within my current role at West Point, it's the number one question that we get asked in 17 different flavors. I think I think soldiers want to have good good lieutenants. They want their lieutenant to be good, right? And they want their lieutenant to show up and be honest. And they want their lieutenant to be tough and be able to lead them by example. They want their lieutenant to be present, and especially when things are hard or uncomfortable, they're not looking for their officer to be like sitting in the office making PowerPoint slides when things are uncomfortable. Maybe other times, like I'm not saying they always want the young lieutenant around, but if it's like cold and raining and they're at the range, yeah, the lieutenant's job is outside in the cold and rain, sharing the experience. So is all of ours, by the way. So I guess I would anchor to being a good human, being a person, being a leader of character, and being physically and mentally and spiritually resilient and tough, and being able to lead by example and being present.
And then what about for captains that are showing up? A lot of them are going right to staff positions. Some of them are going into command with UCMJ authority for the first time. What advice would you give them?
It's a great question. The role of the captain is uniquely different than the lieutenant, mostly because of the command authority, and the company commander acts on behalf of the institution. You are they. You are now part of the machine when you're exercising the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And I think that requires a degree of uh, judicial judicial temperament and a little bit of wisdom and context, and you want to make those kinds of decisions maturely. Being a captain is uniquely different because now you're responsible to mentor other officers in a way that is structured and formalized, and all of a sudden your personal example is influencing the development of other officers. That's not to be taken lightly. And then the last piece that I would add, there's no shortage of colonels with bullet points for commanders. So I'm trying to come up with things that maybe they haven't heard. The last one I would have is, just because you're the commander, whether company, battalion, or brigade, doesn't mean that you can opt out of whatever the challenging thing is. Your soldiers expect you to be with them and to road march with them and to shoot with them and to share the experience and to lead them by example, and to lead them in a way that, like, empathy is created because you truly understand what they're doing, because you're there with them. Like, it's not that soft of an idea if you're like standing in the mud with them. So I would just say don't opt out of those hard things. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of presence.
I'm gonna ask you something else along those lines too, and this is something I failed at as a company commander because when I was a company commander, all I cared about was my company, not really the
That's right.
people to the left or right of me. And, like I wasn't great at always following, the higher level commander's intent because it was my
Yeah.
company. I was in charge. And then it wasn't until I got into battalion command that I realized how terrible that was and how that creates problems for the organization. So how important is that like team? I don't want to be like trite here, but like teammate perspective, or that you're just a piece of a larger organization when you're in company command.
It's the so I've heard it was Major General Tegmeyer, who's down at the 82nd, described relationships as the coin of the realm, and he's 100% correct. And to your point, teamwork isn't what you do when it's easy. Teamwork is what happens when it's hard. Like, it's easy to give the other company some ammunition when you have a surplus, but teamwork is what you give when you don't have quite enough. It's easy to to share a resource when there's excess. Teamwork is what you're doing when you're also just scraping by, so that your peer, your brother or sister company commander, and their troopers, whoever they are, can do as well as you. And then obviously, when folks become field grades, all of those dynamics become hyper amplified.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, it was something I wish I could go back. But then in command, what I saw was that because of that perspective shift, and I think like all the fellow battalion commanders in second squadron commanders in second cav regiment kind of had that same mindset. It made serving as a commander so much better because
That's right.
you knew that when your chips were down, somebody to the left or right of you was going to help you out. And then two, I think this is really important, is that like I sometimes feel like there's like this wheel of fate, and you could put anything on here, like just some horrible life-changing event, or something that's like somebody's worst day in command, and it's going to hit somebody, it's going to hit one of you at some point. And just having, like we were talking about, like the empathy for the men and women to the left and right of you, because like when those events happen, because eventually the wheel is going to land on you with this really bad thing, and there's just something about having the commanders to the left or right of you just kind of huddle around you during those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you describe that, you know, there's a fallacy that exists where folks look at senior officers and think that we've just enjoyed uninterrupted strings of success. That's not true. And if 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 I could redo anything, I'd want to redo my company grade years, and I'd want to be I for sure could have been a better team player at a couple of distinct points. Like, I'm sitting here thinking through examples. Don't ask me of any.
I'm not going to,
But
don't worry
like,
about
I'm
it.
just like, like, golly, why did I do it that way?
Yeah, yeah, and like I specifically remember, like something bad happening to another company commander, and I'd be like, "Whew, man, that wasn't me.
Glad that
Thank
wasn't
God."
me.
Yeah, and but then the same thing would happen in battalion command, and like the first thing you're doing is picking up the phone, either shooting a text or making a phone call, being like, "Hey, man, like, is there anything I could do to help you out?"
Right.
And yeah, it just completely changed. So if you're a company commander listening to this, hopefully you've learned from our mistakes, and you don't have those regrets
That's right. Be a
15,
team
20
player.
years later. Yeah, yeah. Well, last question I have is, as we wind down, is you went from being a brigade commander, tactical brigade in Italy, 173rd, to now the brigade tactical officer at the United States Military Academy. What sort of mental shift did that require to move into that role?
Um, yeah, so I appreciate the question. I feel so I've been in the job 2.5 years. I feel like maybe I'm still making the mental shift. The the underlying principles are the same. The department, it's an interesting job. So there's 4,400 cadets. So the cadets are an aspect of the job. And then there's 82, 83 tactical officers and NCOs. So it's like a cavalry troops worth of, mid-grade military professionals who also need leadership and example and professional schooling and talent management and report cards and awards and readiness and all of those things. I guess I guess what caught me not necessarily off guard, but in term and the tax and TAC NCOs are that's the easy part of the job. They're all seasoned military professionals. The part that caught me off guard is the cadets. First of all, the cadets are amazing. The cadets fill me with unending hope and optimism. Anytime anytime I feel my own um, crisis of optimism, I just go outside and find a cadet and talk to them for a couple minutes. They just unending positivity and optimism for our future. But they're also very inquisitive and very curious. Their appetite for development is insatiable, and their appetite for personal growth is insatiable. And so, just by sheer volume, 4,000 young people who are trying to do their very best to grow and develop and prosper. And sometimes I mean, like it ain't all rainbows and unicorns. Some of them are a little mischievous, right? Um, without without the requisite number of NCOs, it is a remarkably rewarding and challenging position. And I'll consider it to be the highest honor that I've had to have served it.
Yeah. So how do you feed that insatiable curiosity at your level?
Yeah. So to our earlier point, um, I've got no shortage of time I've got no shortage of time for the cadets. In first person engagement in whatever the thing is. And obviously we've got a whole department, and I think we're really pretty good at mirroring that at echelon. The day starts at 5:30. Today started with an expert soldier fitness test, followed by an 8 mile run. The cadets are outside right now doing a squad competition. They're doing a Sandhurst competition in an hour and 2 minutes. I'm going to have three cadets in my office to talk through why some rule exists. They may have violated the rules, so we're going to have a little discussion about it before we adjudicate their punishment. Um, and so it's the underlying leadership principles of engaged, caring presence are the same. The 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 conversation and sort of like explanation of why is more intensive than in an operational unit.
Okay. Well, Mike, I appreciate your time. And then one thing too, I just want to say thank you for. You probably don't even remember doing this. Is when you were in Brigade Command, I lost one of my lieutenants, Haley Hodgson,
Mm.
horrific accident, and you shot an email to me within days, just letting you know that like, hey, you were thinking about me, supporting me from down in Italy, and if I needed anything, just to reach out to you. And so I just want to say, I don't think I've said that to you before. I think I wrote
No,
back,
I
thanks, sir,
appreciate
because
that.
I was going through a lot. But I just
Yeah,
wanted to take the time now and just say appreciate that and appreciate your time today on this episode.
yeah, I appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And hopefully we added some value to the body of work that your listeners will engage with.
I think so. Yeah, we got a little bit of that wisdom passed down over the last hour. So again, thank you so much for your time.
All right, perfect.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook And you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud.